Okay, so today is Go Math 11-6, and we're still looking at volume, right? So up until this point, we've checked out surface area, we've looked at three-dimensional objects, and now we're looking at the amount of space inside those three-dimensional objects, particularly when it comes to mixed numbers and fractions, right? So the first thing that we might start with would be a rectangular prism. All right, so I start with a rectangular prism, and let's say it is 2 by 3 by 1.5. And let's call them feet. Units very important. Oops. Not feet squared, just feet. Okay, so I want to know the volume inside of that object. So I'm going to start with the formula. Volume equals length times width times height. Now you could use base times height times length. You could use any of those things. Just understand really that we want the three of those multiplying together. That's really our ultimate goal, right? So we're going to start by filling in our numbers. 2 times 3 times 1.5. That's 6 times 1.5. All right, so I'm going to take my 1.5 and I'm going to use the C method, and I'm going to turn it into an improper fraction. So 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. So that's 3 over 2 times 6 over 1. Now I'm going to simplify. 2 goes into 2 one time, it goes into 6 three times. So when I multiply across, I end up with 9. So my volume equals 9 feet. And again, it's cubed. I'm using volume, so I have 3 dimensions. I want to account for all 3 of those dimensions, height, width, and length. So it is cubed. All right, so let's take another look here at something in your book. And it might look something like this. We're finding the volume of a rectangular prism. Start with a picture. I'm going to scoot that up just so we can see a little bit better. So I start with a picture because that helps me visualize this. So that's particularly going to be helpful in our next lesson when we start removing pieces of this and say, well, what's the volume of this if it doesn't have a top? Well, we take the top off. Well, I can visualize that by actually crossing off the top. So I sketch the rectangular prism. I have one right here, and it says identify the value for each variable. I have a length, and I want to find the volume of a rectangular prism. It's very important to read those directions. Volume equals base times width times height. There's something along those lines. Length times width times height, however you want to solve it. Now I put in the numbers that I have. 5 times 4 times 2.5. Well, 5 times 4 is 20, and I'm going to apologize for skipping over the picture. I want to make sure that you have a picture of that there. 5 times 4 is 20 times 2.5, and I'm going to make my improper fraction, or my mixed number, into an improper fraction using the C method. 2 times 2 plus 1. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. That's 5 over 2 times 20 over 1. 2 divided by 2, 1. 20 divided by 2 is 10, and that gives me 50, and our unit is inches, and it's cubed. Now, if you're not somebody who likes to simplify before you multiply, you would end up with 20 times 5, that's 100 over 2, which would still simplify to 50 over 1 or 50. Okay, so it doesn't really matter to me. Also, if you're somebody who doesn't like 2.5 being 5 over 2, and you want to use your calculator, or if you happen to know that, and you want to convert that into a decimal, you could do that as well. 2.5 times 20 will still give you that 50, so it doesn't really matter either way. So let's take a look at one more option here. Get my controls on the right side of my board. What happens if they give me something like this? I'll go ahead and I'm going to do 2 more for you here. They give me something like this, and they say, all right, well, Mr. W, if you're so smart with this, I need to find the volume of the prism. Volume equals base times width times height. Now I know what I'm solving for. That's really important. I have my formula. But I don't have 3 measurements. What I do have, though, is an entire base, which is already 2 measurements multiplied together. So if I start here, this might as well be 9 times 1. It really doesn't matter what it would be, right? Or 3 times 3. So I know that the entire base is already accounted for. I can already combine those 2 in my formula. I end up with 9 times 2 and 1/4. But the point being, I want to make sure I start with a formula that I can solve, and then I work through it in a way that I know it makes sense, because I'm checking my work every step of the way here. Do I have the right formula? Am I working with the right shape? Have I multiplied the numbers correctly? I can check them with my calculator. what happens if I have 3 numbers and I missed the first 2 and I don't multiply them correctly? I'm not going to get the right answer, but I won't know what it is if I don't write it down, so I can check each part of it, right? So again, I'm going to make this into the C method. 2 times 4 plus 1 gives me 9/4 times 9 over 1. Side note, if you're somebody who's not sure why I got 2 and 1/4, realize that out of fourths, 4/4 is 1. 4/4 would be 2, and then I have 1 more fourth. And when I add them all together, I do get 9/4. But that's why it's so easy for me to multiply 4 times 2 and then add the 1. That's a shortcut. So I'm going to come across here, and I get 81/4. Well, 4 goes into 80 20 times, and when I subtract 80 from there, I'm left with 1/4. And it's inches cubed. So my volume is 21/4 inches cubed. Now, the last thing that I absolutely want to show you today is they want to try and make your life a little bit easier by giving you different formulas, because this is a cube. So they go, well, cube is simple. You just use the exponent 3, and you cube whatever your side would be. I don't particularly care for that, because while that may make sense to you, and then by all means, please do it, if it doesn't make sense to you, it's one more thing you have to remember. Then you get a rectangle and go, okay, do I cube this? Or do I? We can use the same formula for every single thing that we're solving, right? And that's really important. That makes our life easier. So let's start here. I know the volume equals length times width times height, or 3½ times 3½ times 3½. It's the same thing as cubed. I could take 3½ and cube it, which is 3½ times 3½ times 3½, because an exponent is just how many times I want to multiply that base number by itself. But again, if that makes sense to you, it's a shortcut. You could do it, but you already realize that, if you understand that. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to turn it into 2 times 3 is 6. That's 7/2 times 7/2 times 7/2. And as I multiply across, 2 times 2 is 4 times 2 is 8. 7 times 7 is 49, and I don't know what 49 times 7 is off the top of my head. 7 times 9 is 63. 7 times 4 is 28, plus 6 is 34. That's 343. Well, 343/8 is not a great way to leave our problem. So I'm going to go and take 343 and divide it by 8. 8 goes into 34 4 times. That's 32, and I'm left with 23. 8 goes into 23 2 times, and that gives me 16, and I'm left with 7. So I end up with 42 7/8. Okay, so again, you want to take your time, make sure that you have the right shape, you're solving for the right formula, you input the numbers, writing out each step, and then solve it. Okay, that way you can go back and check your work later and make sure that you're solving it correctly.